The amount of times I've had people messaging me, get a guard on the podcast,
Prison officer.
interview a CO, a DO. Well, your wish is my command, and I have here with me today Sam. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank
Sam,
you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Sam reached out by email. I read his book, and you know, being in prison myself, when I'm thinking there's threats to my life, all I'm thinking about is my own survival. I'm not really concerned about the guards. It's actually like an us versus them mentality. But being out of prison and just reading Sam's book, I really felt like I was there with you, and I sensed how, you know, you tasked to look after some dangerous people, and if you slip for 1 second, you turn the wrong way. Next thing, someone's knocking you out. Next thing, someone's trying to knock you out. Next thing, someone's throwing shit at you. And I just felt how fucking stressful this job is, to be on the other side of it like that. Now, one of the stories that struck me the most in this book was what you wrote about Liverpool gangster Danny G. If you could tell us a bit about Danny G and what happened there, that would be great to start out, I think.
Right, can I just correct first of all, we're prison officers in this country. The press and everyone calls us guards, but you know, it's not good that. Anyway.
Not screws.
I don't mind being called a screw. It's to do with the locks, you know, a lot of people get offended. Me, not so much. Right, Danny G. Danny G is what I'd call a 1%er prison-wise, probably less than 1%. Best example that everyone will know will be Charlie Bronson. Yeah. Very disruptive prisoner, very violent, hard man. Who's made a career out of being in prison. And there's lots of prisoners like him, not so well known, Danny G being one of them. Now, the thing that Danny G brings to the party is his physicality. He's a big lad. He's from a notorious family in Liverpool that are well known. Anyone from Liverpool, if you ask them where they know, you know, they all know who the G's are. Spent a lot of time as a young offender or young person in prison, in and out of prison, and he'll have been battered stupid. So people like Danny G, Charles Bronson, the prison service, to some extent, creates these people.
Yeah.
You know, they don't like the system. They certainly have no respect for prison officers, and they're not fearful of anything. So this lad, maybe 6'2", the first time I saw him, the thing that struck me being a rugby player, thick neck and thick wrists and very, very powerful. You know, a fit 17 stone, maybe unfit 20 stone, but he'd got everything. When I worked on K-Wing, we had lads as big as Danny G, you know, Jim Heads, some really big lads, but they weren't as problematic because these 1%ers have an attitude as well. You know, they have an air about them, and they can cause problems. They can disrupt the whole prison.
Yeah. And what was it that he drew your attention to him? What was he doing?
Okay, Saturday night, I was trained by the prison service, tornado training. That's your riot training to your common man. Every prison has so many officers who are tornado trained. You go away, just same as the police and the army. You know, they put you in as realistic situations as possible, throw things at you. And I mean, they used to really throw things at you. You know, you come away battered and bruised. However, health and safety being what it is now, you know, they're going to be throwing beanbags and tennis balls soon instead of...
What were they throwing?
Blocks of wood. When I come away from my week, I had a bruise, 6 inch by 6 inch on my abdomen, swollen ankle or whatever. You just get on with it. The thing was, when I went from Strangeways, a lot of people at Strangeways wanted to be on the tornado team, do the training, you know, bit of kudos. And it's part of the sort of macho type prison officer thing.
Yeah.
What struck me when we went training was that some of the other prisons, staff were forced to go. So some of the smaller prisons, you get people who didn't want to be in there, fully kitted up, getting things thrown at them, you know, not good. Anyway, so Danny G, Saturday night, just cracked a can, literally, took froth off a can of Stones. That's a Sheffield alcoholic bitter. partial to that, being from Sheffield. Strangeways comes up, so I knew what it was straight away. The previous night, Friday night, I'd been in the jail. Danny G, he was in the segregation unit at that time. Quite often these prisoners spend a lot of time in segregation units, solitary confinement, as it's known abroad, you know, in the shoe, that sort of thing, or on special units, special intervention units, things like this. There's lots of them dotted about in the prison service. And the thing about these units, segregations, and of course prison health cares, is it's quite a high staffing to prisoner ratio. And it's a very, very strict regime. You know, not a lot of time out of cell. Certainly in our prison service, segregation prisoners don't socialise with each other, be out one at a time. They might get a couple on the yard, on separate yards, but they certainly won't be socialising with each other. So this Friday night, I don't know what he kicked off about. I do know that 11 staff got kitted up. When I say got kitted up, overalls, knee pads, shin pads, elbow pads, helmets, gloves. And he was threatening to smash a cell up, or he had smashed a cell up. So this was a planned removal, as we call. Two sorts of restraint in prison. There's a planned removal and there's spontaneous. Spontaneous, obviously, when something happens, you know, somebody kicks off or whatever, bam, you're in there. Anyway, these 11 staff have gone in and he's basically ragged them all over. Not necessarily battered them, you know. The thing about this lad
11
is...
11 at once?
11 staff. Now, what you have to understand is 11 people have been picked to go in there. If you had a choice and you picked the 11 biggest lads in that prison, or lasses, or whatever, you know, that way-minded staff, it'd have been a different matter. But it's not like that in the prison service. You can't pick and choose. You use what you've got. So anyway, he didn't necessarily batter him. What he did do was he very astute, right? He's been in loads of restraints. He's had loads of officers coming at him with shields, the full gear on. He pulled helmets off, you know, pushed people to the floor. Staff were in and out, sweating, helmets back on. There was one lad, quite a big lad in the seg, about 6'2", not as heavy as me, but maybe 15 stone. Got back of his helmet and he had his head going down to his crutch like he was giving him a blowjob, you know. And this is what he's doing, because this is a powerful lad. And the other thing is, as a prison officer, you're taught to restrain people.
Yeah.
You know, arm locks and things like this. It's physicality. You are not restraining that lad.
Yeah.
You know, there's very few prison officers in the service, other than maybe the nationals. The nationals are sort of the elite of the prison service, and they live for restraints and riots and things like that. They're specially trained. So, you know, he just ragged people about. In the end, you know, the governor's like pleading with him. You know, he just said, look, ask me to move.
Yeah.
And I'll move. So that's what happened.
Bloody hell.
Basically, the staff come out of the cell, got his kit, and he moved into the special cell.
Yeah.
Right, a special cell. I don't know when you had these in America. I've seen solitary and the shoe and that in America, and they're pretty basic. Special cell, you might have one or two in prison located in the segregation unit. It's a bare cell. There's no toilet. You get a wooden plinth, maybe 6 foot by 3 foot, 2 inch off the floor. It's just a concrete cell. Most of them have a hatch in the door so you can pass things in and out.
Yeah.
And what they do have usually is a staircase at the side, and they have observation points.
Okay.
You have to have governor's permission now. It used to be more regularly used, but now you definitely need governor's permission to put people in these special conditions.
Yeah.
And I think it's only 24 hours, and then somebody needs to sign it up for another 24 hours.
Right.
So he's trotted in there like with whatever belongings he was allowed to take. I don't know what he took in there. Like I said, there's a staircase at the side and there's observation points. And these observation points are in the ceiling. And they're there so you can see what's going on. Because if you have to go in that cell with Danny G or anyone else, you know, they might be stood off to the side, out your view, with a weapon. Prolific self-harmers might well get put in this special cell. So you need to make sure people are safe. And if you're going in there, that you're safe and you know what's going on. So that's where he's been put. So I was aware of this when I went home.
Yeah.
So we go back to Saturday night, 8 o'clock, phone call from Strangeways, never got one. I did think, I knew what it would be about not answering it anyway, I answered the phone. So Can you come in, please? We're having problems with Danny G. So, like a lot of people in the prison, I mouthed off a bit about the Tornado, because what used to happen with Tornado, when they went on a jolly, as it used to be, you know, off to some prison that's rioting, there was a lot of time spent around, sitting around, playing cards, eating pizza, getting paid a decent rate of pay, and it was usually jobs for boys. So certain individuals would be off doing that all the time, and the rest of you didn't get a look in. So, seeing as I was one of those people who protested that, I figured I'd better turn in for this one. Now, me, first thing I did when I get off the phone, I went to Lavme and boom, vacated my bowels, you know, got rid of everything. Bit of adrenaline, bit of nerves, knew what I was going into, away we go. So I gets into prison, I don't know, 8:30, 9 o'clock. So they've asked for 12 volunteers. Yeah, they've been phoning people up. So when it gets there, in this room, there's 12 staff. There were more than 12 staff. There was a duty governor, which you always have on shift. There was a big daft scouse PO. And there were some dog handlers and things like this. So you got staff there, but there were 12 lads. There were no lasses there who turned in to deal with Danny G.
What does PO mean for Americans?
PO is a principal officer, right? In our prison system, English prison system, you've got prison officer. Your next rank up is a senior officer. They're wing-based, so they're still on cold face, as it were. They're still on shop floor. Then you've got a principal officer. He's sort of the link between a senior officer and a governor.
I see.
So every area, every wing, the segregation unit would have a PO. But also another one of their jobs was duty manager, shift manager. So one day they might be looking after K-wing, the next day they might be duty manager. And they used to call that position Oscar 1. You had an Oscar 1 and an Oscar 2. And then above them, like I said, they were governors of various grades. So, very light-hearted, chitty chat going on in this room. Few sexist jokes, like there always is. So, I'm sort of looking around myself. I'm not the hardest man on planet, Shaun, right? But I have been about. I've got a toughness. I've played rugby all my life. So I'm looking about some of the people who were there, and I'm thinking, right, Danny G, we don't know what state of play is till we have a briefing. So I got kitted up. So we're all sat there, full gear. We also wear balaclavas. Tornado, you've got all the gear, big boots, belt, the lot. And you've got helmet and a balaclava as well. So you are anonymous to the prisoner. So then we had a briefing. PO updated everyone. He'd been kicking off. He got a lighter in his cell, and he was threatening to set the cell on fire. Now, like I said, there's no furniture in this cell, but he'd obviously got clothing. I don't know what else he got in there. But he said he'd been kicking off, so the plan was to go in, strip search him, remove the lighter, clear debris from the cell, and then back out the cell. So
simple as that.
Well, simple as that. That's how it come across. And me, again, I'm thinking, right, Danny G, yeah, strip searching. Strip searching, very difficult. Under restraint, yeah. So someone of his size would be very difficult, because he's not going to give his lighter up easily. So again, lots of joviality.
The lighter's going to be inside his...
Possibly. Prisoners will hold things inside the cell, up the back passage, drugs, lighters, things like that. At night, you know, they tend not to think that anyone's going to be coming in the cell, so they will remove them and leave them on the side till morning. You know, you don't have to sleep all night with your mobile phone up here. So there you go. So again, you know, no illusions me. I'll be honest. Okay, this is how it happens. Then we get to the CNR coordinator. Oh, I need to tell you about the officers. So there's 12 officers. 6 of these officers are CNR instructors. Now, a CNR instructor, control and restraint. That is what every prison officer, private or public sector, is taught. You have 1 week of your training where you're taught to restrain prisoners, working in a 3-officer team. You're taught locks from various mixed martial arts, wrist locks, elbow locks, this sort of thing. It's a safe method for staff and prisoners of moving people and restraining people. Let's go back Charlie Bronson, old days. You know, he's in Belmarsh kicking off. You get 6 biggest, hardest screws to go in. He's a street fighter. He's going to get battered, but they're going to get battered as well. The vast majority of prisoners, within a minute of kicking off or whatever, they're under restraint and away you go. So there's 6 CNR instructors. So these guys have had extra training. They teach CNR to the rest of prison officers. And there's 6 ordinary prison officers. But we're all kitted up exactly the same.
Do you think the odds are in your favour?
Me? No, at no point was I comfortable with any of this. And I'm not just saying that.
Yeah.
I'm a realist, me.
Yeah.
You know, so...
But 12 against 1 and 6 specially trained?
Well, you would think so. What can I say? Anyway, I need to mention the uniforms as well, because this is quite relevant. So, you've all seen Riot Police, prison officers on TV. They've all got the same helmets, same as the military. You've all got the same fire retardant overalls, your arm pads and that. Well, our instructors, CNR instructors, haven't. They've got like the full SWAT gear. They weren't supposed to have full SWAT gear. That's what the nationals wear. They're professionals, like I said. Yeah? The reason they've got it is because the CNR coordinator decided to spend a good bit of the budget on nice German helmets with goggles and fancy gloves and things like this. So they look a bit different to us, you know, a bit smarter.
Yeah. Is that going to somehow put them at a disadvantage?
Well, no. I need to tell you this for later on in the story. Okay. So, you know, they look all dead. There's a fitted. Our overalls, one size.
Yeah.
So geezer next to me, who's 5'7" and not 18 stone like me, has got baggy ass and yeah. Anyway, we looked a bit ragmuffin. So the CNR coordinator then gives the briefing. Right, we're going to go in. 10 of us are going to strip search him and get the lighter. 2 are going to go in with brushes and sweep all the debris up. Yeah. So he points at me and he says, "You're taking a brush in."
Debris duty.
So I looked at him like, and, you know, I'm thinking it was done in a sort of sarcastic, funny way, but, you know, I didn't get on with the guy, and he probably saw it as an insult, but, you know, I'm thinking, okay, I'll take the brush in. Man up, I've turned up, you know what I mean? I'm getting paid the same, I'll sweep up. So the briefing goes something like that. What's going to happen is, all in single file, so that they're in single file, yeah?
Yeah.
In your German helmets, goggles, there's 6 of them lined up with a small shield. Yeah. Hands on each of the shoulders. They're going to go in first. They're going to restrain him. Then we're the second human centipede behind. Not like that nasty film, but we're the second human centipede, yeah? With me and... I can't remember the other lad. I do know him, his name, with the brushes. Yeah. We're at the back. So, we've been in the jail now 4 hours. I got the phone call at 8, maybe 3 hours. I got the phone call at 8. It's now 2 in the morning. So he lines up. Again, nerves me. Played rugby all my life. Every rugby game I've played, bad nerves to the point of almost being physically sick with adrenaline. So I've got my brush, you know, like you do. They've got the shields, and in we go, 2 human centipedes. So when they go steaming in, first thing that no one thought about, it was dark. Yeah, the lights were out. Now, here's the thing, you see. I've already told you we've got observation panels in this cell. Well, Danny G, being very athletic and very strong, somehow has crabbed his way up the walls of this cell and used wet toilet paper to cover the observation points.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's also blocked the one in the door. But no one's thought about the light. So as we goes in, and I'm the last one in, and you know what it's like, people start pushing, so they've all piled in, and the light's out. I'm a bit of a giggle now, yeah? The lights come on, so I've got my brush on the floor, and I looks, and there's 7 screws on Danny G's head and shoulders, and 1 on his legs, yeah?
So they've got him.
And a few others milling about. No, they hadn't actually got him. You see, here's the thing. Danny G's not normal. He was laid the other way. So there's 7 screws on his legs and 1 on his shoulders. So I must have spent at least 10 seconds with my brush trying to get rid of debris, and he's trying to get up already. Okay. So I'm on his shoulders with a lad called Gilly. He's a Yorkshireman like myself and a rugby player, so obviously he's up for it. So he looks up at us, because everyone's now realising that actually they're not on his head. And he said something like, "You dirty screw bastards coming in when I'm asleep." Yeah. And now realisation is really sinking in, because he's trying to get up, and there's probably 9 or 10 staff. So a couple of lads are out of there now. Yeah.
They've got scared.
Listen, I'm focusing on his head and him trying to get up. Yeah. Imagine this is the bed he's laid on. So this is 3 inch high. So Gilly has got his wrist over the edge, and he's got his full weight on it, trying to bend his wrist in some sort of lock.
Yeah.
Not a chance. It's not moving. He's still trying to get up. I don't know what happened next, Shaun. It was one of those, like when you're a kid and you're all running and pushing each other out of the way, yeah, to get out the cell door. You're laughing now. I can't exactly describe. I was one of the last, but I'm facing in the cell. The last man out, who's facing me, Danny G grabbed hold of his belt. So we have a thick belt, and it was honestly like one of those cartoons where the cat runs past the dog grabs its collar, and its legs and arms carry on running. Yeah, and he rags him back into the cell.
He managed to get up then?
Oh, of course yeah.
With 9 people on him?
Yeah. The people on his legs and that, everyone's sort of up. I couldn't tell you that 10, 15, 20 seconds. I couldn't tell you exactly what happened.
How strong is this guy?
He's very strong. You know, he was probably bench pressing a legit 160 plus kilos and squatting. He's a big, but it's his attitude, it's his mental attitude. He's not fearful of prison officers. Yeah. He's not fearful of staff. You know, he's been battered all his life, and he's mad now.
Oh, so this is just beginning.
Yeah, so he rags this guy back in. So what ends up is 4 of us, 3 were CNR instructors, and myself, literally wrestles this officer off him and chucks him out of the cell. Yeah?
Yeah.
So then we're in a position, there's 4 of us with his helmets on and his balaclavas, with his fists up, and now it's serious. You can see it on his face. He's ready for it now. Yeah?
Right.
Ready to spar. Now, people will think, 4 staff, you've got helmets on and everything. I'll tell you now, they're not good odds. There's not a lot of prison officers would like to be in that position. I'm just being honest. Yeah?
Because it was Danny G?
Of course.
Yeah.
You know, he's not some normal prisoner, this anyway.
Yeah.
Gilly, he caught him one, chinned him. The floor is also covered in debris and it's wet. I don't know whether it were piss or whatever. But
has he greased himself up like Bronson
no, he
did?
No, he didn't grease him up. He didn't know we were going in.
Okay.
He didn't know we were going in. I'll tell you about the greasing up later. But there is water on the floor. You know, he's been on one. He's been pissed off. And the stuff that was in the cell is all over the cell. Normally, when they go in their prisons, they have nothing. But so he slipped and we run him like a pack of dogs. Now, it might have been 10 seconds. It might have been 30. Kicks, boots, fists. Yeah. He covers up. We back out the cell. Now, that's self-preservation, that. The paperwork we did at the end of the night reflected what happened. You know, I punched him 4 or 5 times. That officer put that officer put that. Yeah?
Yeah.
So we're out of the cell now. We backs up. We just give us a cell times to get out of the cell. When it turns round, we got a 10-metre walk to an office. It's an adjudication room, but it's basically an office where we'd had the briefing. So that landing, apart from the governor and the PO, is empty. There's no 8 staff. Me, as I'm taking my helmet off, are thinking, where's the other staff? Yeah? So we gets in the briefing room, and three of CNR instructors who weren't in there sparring with Danny G. One of them has got his overalls off already. Now, they take some putting on overalls. He's got his pads off, he's got his overalls off, and he's screaming at the PO, you need to get the nationals in. Right? So what he means is, I'm not going back in there, get the professionals in, we shouldn't have to do this. The other 2 of them were Southerners, no offence, but you know. I remember I said.
No offence to James and Joe.
No offence to any of you.
I'm from bloody Widnes.
Listen. Oh yeah, good lad. It's that neutral accent. Anyway, what I'm saying is there were 2 of us Northerners there. You know, we've been in there like it would be. So I actually said to one of them, "Are you all right?" Because he'd gone white. That's adrenaline. We know it is. You know, they're not exactly cowards, but adrenaline had got the better of them. They weren't for going back in. So they're screaming at the PO. The PO went absolutely fucking nuts. Big Scouse lad. If I need you to go back in there, you're going back in there. We're not. What you've got to look at, you've got to manage prisoners like this. The first sign of trouble, you can't be calling for the nationals coming in, yeah?
Yeah.
Anyway, it all sort of calms down. The big daft Scouse PO goes back to Danny G's cell and has a look inside. And this is the bit I was telling you about. And he's got a pair of goggles on, dancing about. You know, 6'2", 17 stone, with the goggles on. So the PO says, "Danny, give me the goggles." "No, give me some burn." So there's two things going to happen here, right?
Burn cigarettes.
Yeah. He wants to smoke. He's got a lighter. You know, he's got a lighter. Yeah. So he wants to smoke. So there's two things you look at here. We've been in. He's taken a few digs, you know. We've disrupted his evening. Do you give him some burn and de-escalate the situation and get the goggles back? Or do you go back in there where half the team have already said they're not going back in and send them back in for the goggles? Anyway, you've got to look at the de-escalation, right?
Yeah.
So PO, bit of negotiation, goggles come out, bit of burn goes in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then we has a debrief and we does his paperwork. So maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, we've all done his paperwork. They stand us down, which means you can go home.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for that, I've been paid 9 hours at overtime rate or whatever. To be fair, after the debrief, 3 lads who were there, and they're not all like me, they said, you know, it was above their pay grade. They were tornado trained, but all 3 of them were decent officers, but they're not the sort of officer who is going to be fronting people. They're not all like that. Yeah. They'd follow you into battle, but they're not going to be fronting people themselves. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It takes all sorts. Someone with a bit of brawn and then someone who can do the talking. So they stood down. So that was the Danny G incident.
Is he free now, Danny G?
I don't know.
Was he doing a big one back then?
In and out of prison, I would think he'd be in and out of prison. The thing in Liverpool now, there's lots of youngsters coming on the scene. So, you know, I've sort of lost track of what's happening with that. But, you know, very naughty lad. The thing was later on, though, there was a lot of banter and storytelling and things like that. And it was about 3 years later, I was sat on healthcare in association with some prisoners. That's where, you know, prisoners are playing pool, watching TV. And an officer told me about this incident, this Danny G incident, as though he was there. And I know for a fact he weren't. So I sat for 20 minutes while he gave me all the details of the Danny G. And what you have to understand is, in that job, some people steal your lives. You know, I didn't interrupt him and I didn't correct him. Yeah, I didn't embarrass him. I let it go. I did get pulled in the office not long after the incident and told to keep my mouth shut because people were winding people up and people were getting upset.
Yeah.
So,
right, next
that was that.
Tell us about greasing up.
Greasing up, right. First come across that with young offenders or young persons at Forest Bank. Charles Bronson, people like that, they've been doing it a long time. Young offenders, full of testosterone or whatever, always fighting, kicking off with staff.
For American viewers, you just want to briefly explain Charles Bronson, who he is.
Right, Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson is probably the most infamous prisoner in the British prison system. He was an armed robber. The dates might not be true, but he got a 4-year sentence for armed robbery, something like that. Got out of prison for not a long time, came back to prison, and then through his behaviour, he's been locked up ever since. He's been in years. He's done more than a life sentence. He's done more. He's never murdered anyone. But what he did is he's taken people hostage in prison. He's tried to escape from prisons. When I say that, he's maybe climbed up a fencing and got stuck in razor wire. I know he did that, I think, at Wakefield Prison. He got an extra 3 years on his sentence for that. So he's been a very, very disruptive prisoner. The vast majority of his time has been in solitary confinement. Physically, at his prime, he was He was in the Guinness Book of Records for most press-ups in 24 hours, things like this. An insane fitness regime. He'd done some boxing on the out, so he was a brawler, a street fighter, and he's also been absolutely barking. He's been sectioned at times, and he's been put in mental hospitals, in and out, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. He's still locked up now. At some point very soon, someone's going to have to decide whether letting him out. Like I say, he's never murdered anyone, and he's been locked up, I don't know, best part of 40 years maybe, give or take 5 years, I don't know. So, he's an extremely disruptive prisoner. However, in his book, it says, if he knew officers were coming to restrain him, if he'd kicked off, if he'd done anything, or if he was going to protest himself, he would cover himself in anything. Young offenders will use Vaseline, shampoo, anything like that. Smear your arms, all your body. So when officers try and grab hold of you, like the old slippery fish, you can't restrain people. Very, very difficult. They'd also put it on the floor. If you're going into a cell, young person or whoever, would be at the back of the cell and there'd be shampoo on the floor. Extremely difficult to deal with people like that. Obviously, very dangerous.
Do you have any stories of particular individuals you had to go in who'd greased up?
Young offenders all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, I remember one manager I didn't particularly get on with, but we're on the young offender wing. We actually had 2 teams of officers kitted up, and we had 2 prisoners in a cell. So you have to understand, this is a planned intervention, yeah? So in the private sector and public sector, if it's planned, officers will get kitted up, and they will have a camera person, somebody on camera filming it. That's for officers' protection and prisoners' protection. You'll speak to the prisoners, you'll try and de-escalate, maybe tell them, get back of the cell on your hands and knees so you can go in and cuff them, get them to back out of the cell. There's various techniques you can use to get people out. Anyway, so this manager is talking to these 2 prisoners, and without sort of referring to the team or the guy who was coordinating it, she decided that she de-escalated, and these 2 prisoners, she was going to unlock them and let them out of the cell instead of the teams going in. So she did that. These 2 kids were covered in shampoo and God knows what. We chased them up and down the wing for a good 20 minutes. It was quite comical in the end and quite embarrassing as well. So, but there's lots of instances, certainly with young offenders, they were at it all the time.
Just want to ask you about strip searches then, because
strip searches. I've seen your video on strip searching.
I'm lucky because Arizona, before I got incarcerated, had the finger wave, which was the officers put the rubber gloves on and shoved the finger in the anus to see if there was anything in the cavity. But that got ruled unconstitutional. So the degrees of strip searches I had were all visual, ranging from just the basic, drop your boxers, turn around, bend over, spread your buttocks and cough, to more of a scrutiny where they'll look in your mouth, ears, armpits. You have to pull your foreskin back, and the stirring into your dick there with your foreskin pulled back. What is the routine in the UK system?
Right, you're not going to hold me to this, are they? We don't want people like writing in and say he's missed this out and shit like that. Right, I'll tell you roughly. There's 2 levels of search, and then there's strip search. 2 levels of search. There's a basic search, which is a pat down. So arms, back, check the belt. And
they're clothed.
They're clothed. If they're going off to work, making sure they're not taking anything off the wing.
Or stealing food from the kitchen, stuff like that.
Yeah, I've seen loaves of bread that big on the wing, so obviously that don't work too well, does it? Anyway, moving swiftly on. So, there's a basic rub-down search. Again, at audit times, if you got auditors in the jail, it was all done properly. Some of the time you'd see people go, next, that sort of thing. Let's get to the strip searching, right? Strangeways, high security prison, everyone coming in and out of the jail is strip search. I saw the lad from Forest Bank saying at Forest Bank, they take your top off and they give it you back. I'll tell you what that's for. Although it is an indecent thing and it is embarrassing, the reason you search the top off and give them a t-shirt back is so they're not fully naked at all times. I know you've still got your out, etc. But also, let's look back. I took no pleasure from strip searching people. If I was working overtime in reception, you knew you would be willy watching, right? You're good at reception, you'd help the desk officer, and every prisoner, the ones you knew, new ones, tramps off the street, people who've been in police cells for 3 days would all be... Now you're starting to think now, aren't you? Not that pleasant. You know, you go in, Shaun, and you had a routine. Me, I would take the lead. You try and make it, or... not pleasant, that's the wrong word, but you try and do it with as least embarrassment to the person you're doing to as possible. Yeah? Like I said, somebody who's been in police cells for 3 days would stink. They'd drop the boxes. You would obviously have gloves on, you know. They'd have had the same underwear for a week, this sort of thing. You can imagine, can't you, mate? Plus, you get people off the street, people who were lived on the street. The changing rooms by the end of the night would be stinking. But like I say, you do it as with as much humanity as you possibly could. Not pleasant, but it was part of the routine. As far as...
What is the actual routine?
Well, I'm going to tell you, we would get them to take the T-shirt off. Yep. You know, you look in the mouth, ears, hair. You can do all that if you want. Take the T-shirt off, arms up, so you can check on the armpits, turn round. Then you give them the T-shirt back. Yeah? Tracky bottoms off. I'm not going to do it. It's too much of a mouthful. Everyone would have the same thing with the socks. You'd tell them, you know, don't flick your socks. Take your socks off slowly. Turn them inside out. No flicking. What does everyone do? Flick. That's that. You get them to put them down. Yeah. I would then get them to take the boxes off. Give them, yeah. Most of them get older nuts. That's fine. You can see if there's anything there. Get them to turn round. Sorry. Show them the soles of your feet. Yeah, bump, job done. You be out there as quick as possible. Let them get dressed.
There's no spreading of the cheeks and you squatting down having a look.
Right, you could use a squat. You wouldn't do it in reception with people. You know, you're certainly not looking in foreskin or any of that.
Yeah.
But you could get someone to squat. But it was like, it used to be, like in strange ways, dedicated search team, they're specialists. They live and die for searching, would get someone to squat if they suspected something was there, yeah?
Yeah.
But more so with the human rights and things, they're moving away from that, you know, that sort of thing.
A lady wrote to me while I was in prison. Her brother was in prison in Japan, and she said in Japan they have glass rods that they stick up the anus to see if there's anything in there, and you've got to go through that.
Basically, if you've got anything inside you coming into British prisons... Most prisons have a boss chair. It's well known that all prisoners know if they're coming in. It's like a metal detector. So you sit on it, and if you had something up your backside, it would indicate. What would happen, not so much now, years gone by, it'd be very rare someone to try and bring a phone in like that. Because what you would have, you'd have a couple of special dry cells in the segregation unit. So if you come in and you indicated you had a phone, we put you in a dry cell. If you went to the toilet, that phone will be captured. It won't be going down the sewer or whatever. So you either surrendered it or you stayed in the seg. Now, if your 2 cells are full, you're knackered. You know, I've been on visits when someone has knowingly received a phone and drugs and inserted it, and he had no choice but to let it go back to the wing. So,
what are the most common things prisoners store inside their bodies?
Now, a lot of people are taking tobacco in.
Tobacco, because of the ban?
Because they banned it. I understand why they banned it. It's like the passive smoking thing.
Yeah.
You know?
I was stuck in cells with smoking.
The problem is, right, an ex-customer, as the crow flies, lives 100 metres from me. I haven't seen him for a while. He's probably back inside. Last time he was out, the ban was just coming in. I was on the sick at the time. And we both said, you know, people are just going to make a lot of money. As it is now, I believe, Rizzler paper. Everyone knows what a Rizzler paper is. You roll. They go for about £1. A skinny burn, a Rizzler paper with a bit of tobacco in, £5. Lighter, matches, £20. And I believe 50 grams of tobacco, maybe £500. something like that. But I found out the other day from a lad that's just got out from the private sector that what they do now for everything, or they are doing in Forest Bank, they have a bottle top, say off a lemonade, and that's what you're buying. They'll pack that with tobacco. That is a unit of measurement. So you pay for a bottle top, or you put your drugs in it, or whatever, or your spice, and that's what they buy, a bottle top. That's what I've heard. But yeah, so tobacco, drugs. There's another lad I know. I was in reception doing the strip searching. He came into prison. I hadn't seen him for a good while. We'll talk about dynamic security shortly. But I got a rapport with him. He was a bad lad at Forest Bank. He'd been in the segregation when I was there, so I knew him well. I'd restrained him a few times. And surprisingly enough, when you have had that contact with prisoners, quite often you have a bit of a bond after. You know, they know who you are. They know your name straight away. And you go from there. Anyway, he landed in strange ways. I was strip searching him. He says, "Can I have a word on quiet, Mr. S?" Yeah. So pulls me out to one side. "I'm in debt on now." I says, "Yeah." He says, "I've got loads of drugs." I says, "Where?" He says, "In my stomach." So I referred him to one of the nurses, did my paperwork. He went out. I don't actually know how they got the drugs out of him. They did get the drugs out of him. I don't think they opened him up, but he actually got extra time for bringing drugs into Majesty's Prison. The reason he brought him in, he committed an offence to get arrested, to come into Manchester because he was in debt. And somebody said, "You either pay this debt by bringing drugs in," so there you go.
So you mentioned dynamic security. What does that mean?
Right, dynamic security. In prison, every prison, the prisons you've been in, prisons worldwide, you've got procedural security, which is procedures, rules, regs that you stick to. You've got your physical security, which is obvious, gates, bars, dogs, razor wire. And then you've got dynamic security. Dynamic security is a big thing. I try and mention it all the time. It is the relationships between staff and prisoners. So if you go back 45 years, prisoners were locked up 23 hours a day. They get an hour's exercise, and there was no staff-prisoner relationships. A lot of animosity, but there was a lot of staff to deal with that animosity. So I started at Forest Bank. So when I first started, I was new, I was green. As you get to know people, they get to know you. You will know which guards. I've read your book. I've read your book, Shaun, which was really good.
Thanks.
I mean, Mrs. now reading it, and she don't read books. And these guards, you know, if two guards were on shift, you could get away with a bit more. You'd also know another guard was a bit dodgy, and he might well give you a good twatting with a stick if you got in his way or whatever. So I can try and blag prisoners as an officer, but they'll see me every day. They'll see me interact 100 times a day with different prisoners, and they see what you're like. Yeah? They know the officers are fair. They know the officers who's going to do jack shit for them, so they keep away from them and go to you. So you start building relationships. So when I went to Strange Ways, there was a lot of prisoners in there who'd been in Forest Bank, and I knew them. So it's them relationships, and it's them relationships that did make prison a safe place. Because, working on K-Wing, 200 prisoners, you know them all. You get somebody on the wing who's a bit of a dickhead who took a dislike to me. Somebody be having a word in his shell like, "He's all right, Mr. S, don't be like that," or whatever. And it's how you interact through the day. Loads of interactions, a lot of them built up over years. Lots of repeat offenders. So, they've been, "You're all right, how you doing, lad, how you doing," that sort of thing. And that's what made it safe. You get somebody come up to you on K-Wing, "Mr. S, you might have a look in 218. So there's two lads about to get to it. It's not because he's a grass, but he knows if they start fighting, we press an alarm bell, they're banged up for night. That sort of thing, yeah? That's how it works. What happened in 215 at Strange Ways?
And grass equals snitch for the Americans.
Yeah.
I interviewed a lad from Manchester.
Snitch.
And all the Americans, he's like, "Talking about marijuana? What's going on, grass?" They just didn't understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Snitch, grass, yeah, same thing. But it's not, it's self-preservation for them. They want to go on exercise. They don't want banging up, so it's a nice day.
Yeah.
And they also, like I said, they get to know what you like. So I was known as a fair officer. I'd do my my fair bit. You know, if somebody, for instance, let's say the mother was in hospital ill, and they'd used all the phone credit up, I might well make them a phone call. Lots of officers wouldn't do that. Lots of officers would. You know, just let them know. He's stuck behind his door. His mother's got cancer in hospital. Shit. So it'd be a 2-minute call. I've had a word, you know, blah, blah, blah. You'd help them out what you could. You know, you're not bringing phones in and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But you build a relationship, and they do get to know what you like. And on K-Wing, it was a bit of my downfall, because I ended up 3 landings on K-Wing, yeah? So you got about 70 prisoners on each. I'd end up doing work for the 3s and 4s when I was on the 2s. Because somebody come in, somebody I knew would shout down, Mr. S, will you sort this out for this lad? And, you know, it's just, that's what prison officers are there for.
Yeah.
You have to realise, you know, prisoners can't do anything for themselves. They can't check the money. They didn't used to be able to book visits or sort any problems out. They rely on you sorting them. And those relationships made it safe. You'd have a laugh and a joke. I used to say me, best job I ever had, good at work, have a laugh and a joke, nobody gets injured, very cliched, go home, easy life sort of thing.
In America, one of the control mechanisms that's used a lot, and I'm curious as to how much it's used in the UK, is the P test, because, say, you know, the guards know everybody's high. 90% were high where I was housed. If a prisoner's acting up, or if they didn't like that prisoner, they threaten to give them a P test, knowing they're going to, test positive for drugs. Then they're going to lose the visits. They're going to lose the privileges, such as being able to buy items from the commissary. Is that something that is in use in the UK?
Right, piss testing.
Yeah.
We had, at Forest Bank and Strangeways, MDT, mandatory drug testing. So we had a team of individuals at both prisons who were trained to take piss tests. You know, a lot of paperwork involved. You've got sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a chain of evidence. So if you take a piss test, it's all got to be signed and dated and dotted, and there's a chain of evidence. That is dictated to by the prison system, both at Forest Bank and Strangeways. MDT might have to do 80, for instance, random tests a month, which is literally a random test. They'll get a list produced, and then they've got 4 weeks to test them prisoners. Yeah? We used to have suspicion. You could fill a form in for suspicion. So if there's 2 clowns on the wing, you know, being dickheads and that, and you can stink weed, you might well put a report in for a suspicion test, and the MDT, if they got time, might well come and test them. As far as punishment goes, back in the day, I hate that, but in years gone past, prison governors could add extra days. So if you got, say, a positive test for cannabis or grass or weed, does that cover the American market? Yeah. They might give you up to 18, 22, 24 days. There was a maximum, yeah. If you come clean, so you're on your nicking now, you've been placed on report, you're in front of the governor. Shaun, positive piss test, how do you plead? Guilty. I had a joint, gov, I'm sorry. You might get 7 days. You might get 3 days. You might not get any added days. You might get commissary, canteen over here, where they can buy food and products, toiletries. Is that what we're talking, commissary, canteen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you might lose that. If you went not guilty, they can do a second test. If that comes back positive, the prisoner can have their own test done. They can pay through their solicitor and have their own test done, a third test, which goes to a specific laboratory, obviously. They don't get the solicitor and say, go away and test this. So if you played that out, now people might play it out because they're out in 8 weeks, and it might take 12 weeks to do all 3 tests. But if you played that out, you might well get the max 24 days. Heroin, smack, skank, what do they call it in America?
Yeah, it's the same.
Same?
Yeah.
You know,
heroin.
I think it was up to 42 days.
Okay.
So when I was at Forest Bank, there was a young offender. Now, young offenders used to smoke a bit of weed, not so much smack, heroin, stuff like that. All young offenders were anti-smack, heroin, brown, whatever you want to call it, yeah? But we had a young offender there. He was quite violent, so he got in a lot of fights. He came in on a 3-month sentence and served 3.5 years with added days, because he was on report every week, and they were just giving him added days. In the end, I think the parole board, probation or whatever, they come to some sort of agreement to get him out of jail, because the way he was going, he was never going to get out. Yeah. Nowadays, probably what? I don't know, maybe 210, maybe a bit before, a bit after. It was ruled that prison governors couldn't give added days. So what prisons had to do, if someone got a positive piss test, they'd have to have a district judge in. He used to come in once a month, I think, and he would sit, and those tests would have to go in front of him, and the district judge was the only person who could give added days. Very long process, very cost. Every prisoner would get a barrister in or a member of his legal team, cost the prison service thousands. And for the actual amount of people who were getting punished, you've got to look at it and think, is it worth it?
Yeah. I've been in prisons where there was a black market in piss that was drug-free. And, generally, though, when you had to do these pee tests, you got to do it with the guards staring right at your dick to make sure that you're not switching anyone else's peeing for your pee. Is that the same here?
Yeah, well, I did a bit of MDT before I left Strange Ways. Similar sort of thing. Strip search. You check there's no glove attached to the bollocks, so they can squirt it in.
Yeah.
Lots of different ways of doing it, and people will still try it on. You're watching them. It's got to be quite a clinical process.
Yeah.
I will actually know one story on this subject.
Yeah.
So we had an officer who I worked with at Forest Bank, who eventually got 7 years for bringing heroin, smack, skank, whatever you want to call it, into the prison. There was a prisoner on the wing that we worked on, B2. Now, I worked with this lad, and he got on well with prisoners, not in a creepy way. He just had his own style. I got on well because how I were. They say how you were. So I didn't suspect he was doing anything. But what was happening, we had quite a well-known Salford drug dealer on that wing who'd approached him and said, I'll bung you whatever, 600-700 quid a week if you bring me smacking. So they got this nice little deal going. And then this drug dealer had a random drug test, and he was using as well. So he went to one of the wing cleaners or orderlies for the audience in America. They're prisoners who are picked out for their attitude, behaviour or whatever. They get a set of green trousers, a pair of work boots, a light blue shirt. They get paid weekly, and they will work on a wing, sweeping, mopping, cleaning the showers.
Like trustees?
Trustees, yeah, that sort of thing, yeah.
Trusted to work.
So he went to one of these for a sample of piss, and I don't know how he delivered it. He did deliver it, but he obviously paid him because he was using. What the drug dealer didn't know was that the cleaner was also using. So he bought a sample of piss and used it. So when it come back positive, he went absolutely bananas on the wing. He kicked off, he ended up getting restrained, and he ended up in the block. Segregation, shoe, whatever you want to call it, solitary. So he's down there. Now, prisoners know what's going on. They know bent screws. They know, who to approach, who not to approach. So another prisoner on the wing, who was also a drug dealer, approached him and said, look, I know he was paying you X amount. I'll give you a little bit more. You start bringing him for me. So he thought, yeah, I'll do that. The guy down the block, he found out, and I don't know whether he bubbled him, somebody bubbled him, they grassed him, and police were involved at a later stage, but basically he was stopped coming into the prison, and he had a shoe full of heroin, and he ended up with 7 years.
Bloody hell.
So,
let me ask you this then. A lot of people have said that when the P tests were introduced, before the P test, weed was a drug of choice, but because it stays in the system for over a month, people switch to heroin to avoid the detection, because heroin only lasts a matter of days in the pee. And now we got spice.
Now we got spice, right?
In the pee test at all, which is
it doesn't. It doesn't. But do you know what? I think it's it's not a consequence the amount of people who actually get caught drug testing. I mean, positive P tests, as you want to call them, is minimal for me. It's, it might as well be redundant.
What years were you a guard?
A prison officer. I think I started at Forest Bank in 2-1 till about 2-4. I started in Strange Ways April 2005 to September 2015.
Did you come across any high-profile prisoners?
Quite a few high-profile prisoners. There's 1 or 2 mentioned in the book. Right. If I explain, there's a lot of prisons in the book that are anonymous. Yeah, and this is how I looked at it when I worked with a writer. The fire starter who's in the book, right? There's a guy in the beginning who is a prolific self-harmer and sets cells on fire. As a prison officer, dealing with things like that, can be quite stressful and quite difficult. You don't need to know who that guy is, yeah? And lots of people in that book, you didn't need to know who they were, but what I wanted to put across is what you have to deal with. Part of the thing with high-profile prisoners is how that affects you. So obviously, Mark Bridges mentioned in the book, I would not want to give kudos to anyone like Mark Bridger. We had Dale Cregan.
What was Mark Bridges' story?
He basically killed a young girl. He, at the time he said he'd run her down or whatever. Horrendous for the family. So it was about dealing with people like him. I've seen, well, it might sound sad, I don't know. You tell me. There's a couple of programs where they've done documentaries, and one of them I've watched about 5 times with that guy. Because I worked with him for 10 months, and I didn't realise how much he affected me. And one of my friends, one of the nurses who worked on there, she said the same. When she'd actually left the prison, she didn't realise how much that guy had got under his skin and how much she hated him. These high-profile prisoners are not treated with kid gloves. That's wrong. The worst thing for the prison service would be if Mark Bridger killed himself before trial. So he was put on healthcare where I worked, and not protected. That's a wrong word, Shaun. You got to look after him and give him everything he was entitled to, but also keep him safe. And people won't understand that. But if you're going to do the job, particularly where I worked on healthcare, we had all manner high-profile prisoners come on and come off, then you have to be professional.
Was it the nature of his crimes that affected you, or was it the actual dealing with him and his energy?
All of it,
What was it about him that affected you then in today?
He was very manipulative. I could see that. He'd have staff talking to him. Like, let's get something right. These people, if you see it, the psychologists, people better than me and more qualified than me, will tell you they're very manipulative. They dart people. I saw one guy say he was probably one of the worst killers he'd ever come across. Just by his actions and how he behaved and that. And they'll draw people in. Prison officers are normal people at the end of the day. While we're on that subject, we'll stay on the high profile, but as a prison officer, like I've said, Shaun, they're not all like me. They're not 6 foot 18 stone. There is some lads bigger than me, but not a lot. There's a lot of lasses in there. There's a lot of sort of middle-aged older people in there. So how I would put it to you was how you would view prison officers. You imagine a wedding. One of your families, a wedding you've been to. You've had a good day. All the friends have come at night, right? So, bam, you stop the music. Anyone under 18, get rid of them. Anyone over 68 now, because as a prison officer, you're capable of working at 68, which is disgusting. Get them out of the room and have a look what you've got. You've got your 50-year-old auntie who's lovely and does baking. She's a prison officer. Her husband likes a few pints. He's a prison officer. Your nephew plays rugby. He's a big lad. He's a prison officer. They're not all like me. They're not all big with bald heads. They're just normal people. Yeah. Civil servants, end of the day. Yeah. So, some of them are vulnerable. Some do get taken in. It's a very difficult job. And that's what I wanted to put out there. It is a difficult job, and they're normal people doing that job. No amount of training will ever prepare anyone. You know, that was a bit of criticism that was levelled at me. Somebody said about training, you know, you should have never been a prison officer because you've been in front of a judge. Well, I were in front of a judge for fighting, you know, when I was younger.
Yeah.
But that didn't disqualify me from being a prison officer. You know, you do need tough people. You need people who've been about a bit, people who can talk. It's actually the team. As individuals, prison officers, if we take K-Wing, when I was on K-Wing, there were 40 staff, yeah? 20 of them staff, fantastic staff, 10 pretty good staff, and 10 staff who weren't good. But as a team, together, we got a really good reputation and it worked really well. And that's what it's about.
So which other high-profile ones were there? Any like Moore's Murderer or Fred and West, any of that kind of level?
Well, I don't know whether they've been down here. There's a lot that were...
Shipley, wasn't he up here?
Yeah, he was. I had nothing to do with it. Shipman. Yeah, you know, he was on Healthcare before I went on. Horrible person again.
Yeah.
You know.
How many people did he kill? Like hundreds and
He's
hundreds?
probably the most prolific serial killer. I recently saw a documentary. They don't know for sure, but he could be one of the most prolific serial killers ever.
Yeah.
You know, but it does affect you. There was lots of high-profile prisoners to the northwest and above. The reason Strangeways, I believe, was made high security prison or whatever, outside London, majority of Cat A prisoners are from Manchester and Liverpool. You know, there's some serious people up there. So there were lots of people who were high profile to the area. Prisoners and staff would know, some of them coming in, kiddie killers. We had one lad who was labelled a Facebook killer. You know, lots of them that you might not have heard of because of the locality.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And also, it depends where they get arrested.
Yeah.
If somebody from London kills someone, shoots off to Scotland, he might end up in our jail. So, Yep, seen a few dead bodies in prison. Sounds very callous, that. It's not at all. The one lad found on Healthcare, not hanging so much as he'd clotheslined himself. By that I mean, when I found him, we had this prisoner. He'd come into prison, been very disruptive, and ended up in a segregation unit, solitary, the shoe or whatever. And he'd gone out to hospital because he thought possibly he was ill. Shit everywhere in the cell. And he was Polish, so there was a language problem. So he went to hospital, he was on a bed watch, and I think he was on a 6-officer bed watch. Normally, a bed watch is where a prisoner goes out for medical attention and might well stop in a hospital. Usually, it will be in a room separate to other people, but you could be on a ward, and depending on their security risk, for instance, somebody who got 2 weeks to go might be a 2-officer. Somebody extremely violent could any number of officers, up to 12 officers. So this guy is on a bed watch, I think 6-officer bed watch. He's disruptive, he's trying to smear shit on officers, he's trying to throw shit at nurses, violent tendencies. Very difficult situation, that, because you are in a public place. So he came back into prison and he ended up on Healthcare. He was very difficult to manage. There was a language barrier, but he was very unpredictable, very hostile, very aggressive. Anyway, he'd been on there 3-4 months, something like that. He was due in court. The reason he'd come back to us from court, his offence was carrying a knife. He would have probably served 3 months and been released. But because of his lack of cooperation in court, even though I had an interpreter, the judge sent him back to prison. Anyway, no one suspected that he was at any risk of harming himself, suicide or anything like that. No special measures other than he was on an unlock protocol. I'm sure you have these in America. Basically, the segregation in healthcare, you have a protocol. There's always a minimum of 2 staff to open anyone up. But he was on a 3-officer unlock. So in order to get him out so he could collect his meal, you need to have 3 staff. So if you only had 2 staff, you'd have to take the meal to him. Anyway, I went this particular morning and he'd clotheslined himself.
What do you mean by that?
What he'd done, he'd tied a shoelace. There were barred windows in healthcare. They had perspex, so they were like 4 or 5 bars across the window, square bars, and perspex in between them, as it were. So he tied his shoelace like a clothesline from each of the end bars, and he'd leant against it, pushed against it. Now, this could have been death by stupidity. Again, no disrespect there. You know, it weren't round his neck. He hadn't dropped and hung himself. He could have possibly been testing things. And I think it's vagal nerve or something. I think at his coroner's report, he'd caught that vagal nerve. And if you do catch that, medical persons, please forgive me if I ain't got the name right, then you would pass out.
Puts you to sleep.
Puts you to sleep. So he was in a position like a ski jumper when he leaves a jump. He was leant forward. You know, his feet were flat to the floor. He was leant forward. He got his arms down by his side and his jaw was fully extended. It was horrendous. The thing about this prisoner I forgot to mention, I have never smelled anything like him in my life. His body odour was not of this world. From being in hospital to being in healthcare, I honestly never smelled anything like it, Shaun. We used to get him out as regularly as we could, bearing in mind he was difficult to deal with, shower him, and we'd have to put him in another cell and have clean clothes in there in order to clean that cell. The stench was horrendous. Anyway, he was stiff as a board, well dead. I got my mate, Debbie, give her a shout because she's my mate, and we got him down, commenced CPR, the nurse turned up, and here's the thing, right, he was dead, yeah, really dead, but we did CPR, that's what you do. A lot of people are just, you know, what are you fucking doing that for, he's dead, or whatever. That's what we started doing. The nursing staff didn't complain about that. The nurse who attended, who was called Hotel 1, that nurse attends all the incidents. No one complained. The stench was horrendous. It was probably, I described, the worst day of my prison career. And that's not just the dead body, it's how people behaved. How it was managed, again, which was nothing to do with the healthcare staff. It was not a good day. You know, it affected me quite bad. However, nobody took any time off. You know, we were all there next day at 6 o'clock. What I will say, interestingly enough, 2 guys separately who attended that incident. What happens in any British prison, private, public sector, if there is an incident like a death in custody, self-harming, a fight or anything, someone presses an alarm bell which alerts staff on other wings that there is an incident happening. So somebody pressed the bell on healthcare, so staff attended from other wings. Now, because it was death in custody and not a fight, people had come on, you know, they'd look, see what was happening and leave that wing. So 2 lads separately, after they read the book, both messaged me and said, you know, that day affected us. So they came on, they saw us working on him and they left. And they both went to another wing, I think it was G wing on the exercise yard. One of them says to the other, did you smell that smell? And he says, you know, one of them were having a fag. One of them were physically sick, which made the other sick. And both of them said they couldn't get it out of their head for weeks. And they're 2 guys who have attended, seen the body and left. You know, so there was 2 staff on there, one who was sent home. He was a young lad, he was an ex-squaddy, and you could see he was in physical shock. He was white. An SO come on, Kev, who was a really good guy, he was all about staff. Took him to one side, made sure he was home, made sure he got a lift home, looked after him. There was also a dog handler who at the time wasn't directly involved, but I spoke to him some months later. He sort of questioned me when I was coming into work and said, are you all right? And I says, yeah, I'm all right. What, you know, he says, that incident. I says, has it bothered you? He says, I'm having nightmares. But, you know, there was no aftercare, no nothing. So, but what was really bad, and it was one of the things that made it a bad day, the lad who was in shock was ridiculed by other staff who were there. They were taking the piss. This macho bollocks, it's just a fucking dead con. What's his fucking problem? Needs to get a set. You know, and that just added to the woes for me. You know, the incident itself's bad enough. Any death in custody will affect staff.
Yeah.
However, how people behave sometimes can make things much worse. What I will add, because again, I was criticised of, you know, how I discussed and reported this incident. It was a good few months later I actually attended coroner's court. And at this coroner's court was this lad's sister. So I was one of the last people on the stand at coroner's court, and the coroner said to me, we've got this young lady here, she's been here for 2 weeks now. You know, her brother's died in a British prison, and no one has explained to her yet why he was on an unlock, why he was on healthcare, and his behaviour. So it was my job to sort of explain to her, and I did talk like we're talking now. I was on a stand, coroner here, I did talk to her, and she had an interpreter, she understood some English, and I explained her brother's behaviour. And afterwards, the solicitor come up, the prison barrister, and said, you know, she come to me and thanked me for what you'd said.
Yeah.
So it does affect us, and I do understand that there's also other people, you know, families of prisoners that are going to be affected.
You said about the things she was wondering about. What I was wondering about was how he had shoelaces, like why he was allowed to have shoelaces.
Right, here's the thing. When they come on healthcare, if someone came on healthcare, we had a standard protocol. We would strip search them, make sure they got no weapons. They weren't allowed razors. In the morning, we would give a prisoner a razor and put a little sign on his door saying there was a razor in there, and we would take it back. We would take the shoelaces off them, belts and everything else. Like I say, this guy will have gone through that procedure, but 3 months later, you know, no signs that it was at risk of suicide or self-harm. This is another thing. It was a big shock finding him, Shaun, because there'd been no signs there. I never for 1 minute thought that guy was going to harm himself, and nobody else did either, you know. So yes, when they first go into segregation units, healthcares, they are strip searched, they'll have belts taken off them, things like this, anything that they could make a ligature with. We also have cells in healthcare that used to be called anti-ligature cell. There's no such thing. They were safer cells. They were safer than a normal cell. He was in a standard prison cell because no one considered he was at risk.
So you said there was other situations with corpses. This one was the worst of your life that you saw, the one you've described. How bad were the other ones?
There was a young lad at Forest Bank. I've also seen, if we can mention this after, how it has affected other staff who've attended, particularly nursing staff. Nursing staff have a horrendous time at coroner's court every time there's a death in prison. You know, I have never met a nurse who did anything other than try and save lives. Yeah. So I was at Forest Bank and there was a nurse, and at Strangeways we had a constant obs cell. I don't know where you have them in America. It's basically a cell. Well, in fact, having seen the prison documentaries on America, most cells in America just have bars, don't they? There's no walls and doors.
Plexiglass.
Yeah, so you can see in. So our constant watch cell, if you got someone who was violent or at risk of suicide, self-harm, killing themselves, a constant watch cell, you'd have plexiglass, perspex and bars so I could see in, and you'd have someone 24 hours a day observing them and taking notes. So at Forest Bank, very similar, we had a big cell. Again, there was nothing in it. It was like a special cell, but it had a big window, maybe 1.5 meters by 1 meter, something like that was perspex. So you were looking directly in, no bars, no nothing. And we had a young lad in there. He had been in the segregation unit. Very difficult prisoner to manage. He looked about 14. He was about 19, 20, and we had to restrain him a couple of times when he was trying to strangle himself. I think once we caught him he got a bed sheet and he had tied it around his testicles and penis, you know, almost pulling them off, as it were. So This is a very disturbed individual. The reason he'd been in the segregation is because when he'd first come into prison, he'd gone to a normal wing, and it had taken 12 staff to remove him to the segregation unit. This is a lad who looks 14, who's about 19, 5'2", baby face, horrendous strength.
Sometimes the mentally ill people, what else, have got this
the worst
strength.
The worst. So he's incredibly unwell, but incredibly violent. So because of this incident of tying not pleasant, is it? He was in the constant on healthcare, and they only used to have one officer on healthcare during the day and during the night. So as I knew this lad, I was asked whether I would do a couple of night shifts. So I was going to sit there. I can't remember. I think we probably did 12 hours, 6 while 6, observing him. I got a bit of the old dynamic security going on. He'd been in the seg a couple of weeks. I knew him, he knew me. We could have a conversation. I might have done more than a couple of nights. I can't remember now. Anyway, there was a nurse on there, lovely nurse. And the first night, about 2 o'clock, she says to me, do you want to have an hour? Because it can get incredibly boring. You start nodding or whatever. So she gave me an hour. Have a walk around, chat to the other officers, sit in the office, have a brew, whatever. It was the second or third night that I was doing this shift. I need to tell you what he got in this cell. It was a strip cell. He got nothing in there. He probably had a pair of boxers on and what was called a suicide blanket, anti-ligature blanket. Extremely tough blanket, thick, allegedly that people can't make nooses or ligatures out. So he'd got one of them, toilet roll, something like that, and his boxers on, so there was nothing else in there, yeah? So that's quite important, that. Anyway, I've been chatting to him a couple of nights, no mither. This particular night, he's chatting to her. Are you going to come and sit down, miss, and talk to me? Yeah, I'll come and sit down. She sat down, I went for a brew. Only been gone 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes, bit of a scream. So what he's done, he's been under the blanket. He got a ligature made of sheets. He'd put it around his neck, under the blanket, so he's looking. Waited till the nurse was on there. He'd got his legs up to his knees. He got the ligature around his foot. He'd removed the blanket. She'd seen it, and he'd extended his foot. So it obviously tightened on him. By the time we got in there, we didn't carry fish knives at Forest Bank. The nurses, I believe, did. We had them at Manchester, strange ways. A fish knife for the American audience and the British audience. It's a knife. It's got like a fish mouth with a very sharp blade. And what they're for is the anti-ligature. So if someone's got a noose tight around the neck, you can hook it under, extremely sharp, and cut them down, hanging situation. So it was remove this ligature. It might have been a minute and a half, very difficult. Anyway, he was unconscious. Paramedics called. He went to hospital and he died sometime later. I can't remember whether it was, maybe a couple of days or whatever. There was some damage. That nurse, I don't know whether she left the prison. She was obviously really traumatized, and I don't know whether she left nursing or not.
One of the things I noticed is like the gallows sense of humour that the prisoners cultivate. And then when I read your book, I saw how you guys had your own brand of that. And there was a situation where you have touched on what we call shit slingers, where you took the old man. Protest. You took the old man to medical.
Yeah.
Can you tell us that story?
Oh God. Well, I can now actually. Should we call him Mr. Smith to be polite? He's dead now.
Yeah.
He's a no percentage prisoner. Again, it's something I used to say this. So we've got this guy, he's old. Yeah, he's not a physical threat. However, I need to go back on that. Let's just say he'd been in our prison a few times over a couple of years. He looked 90. He was probably 60. And he was a diabetic, drug user, alcoholic. Extremely abusive, threatening, but no physicality to him. The few times we had him in prison, it was either in segregation unit where they actually have dirty protest cells. It's now called dirty conditions. Dirty protest, dirty conditions. That's where people use shit, feces, excrement, whatever you want to call it, to make our job more difficult, to protest. You know, it's not pleasant. You'll have seen it yourselves. A lot of people can't tolerate it. A lot of people don't understand it. But this guy was all about shit. He would throw it at everyone, poke it through his doors, etc., etc. Again, he was another guy who didn't present a physical threat to officers. You were never going to be laying hands on him because of his frailty when he was in prison and his looks, basically. And also, a lot of his, when he was on healthcare in particular, a lot of his aggression and malice was aimed at the nurses. However, he did, some years before, stripe a nurse in a Manchester hospital. When I say stripe a nurse, he had a blade, he was taken to hospital from prison, and he opened a nurse's face.
Stripe me when you've got two razors next to each other. Yeah.
It might not have been stripe, but it might have been a single blade, but he opened the nurse's face off.
Properly.
Yeah. So, you know, when I'm saying he didn't pose a physical threat, he had scarred a nurse for life. So, which is disgusting.
Yeah.
He punched one of the nurses really hard in the breast when he was on healthcare, to the point where she was concerned about that. And shit. He was all about shit. Cell fires. He used to set himself on fire. He'd set cells on fire. There was one officer, when he first come into our jail, actually got sacked and did time. The reason I'm telling you now is because it left a nasty taste with all the officers who knew this guy. So you imagine now you've got somebody highly manipulative, chucking excrement, feces, shit about, setting things on fire. Well, at this time, he was in the segregation unit. So this lad was on nights all week. On nights, you have a cell key in a special pouch. If you unlock a cell with that key, you have to fill paperwork in. So no staff on nights can go into a cell. In the day, obviously, a big bunch of keys. Anyway, we aren't going into much too detail. He gave this officer, who was very stressed, he worked in the segregation a long time, he gave him a hard time. And this officer ended up punching him, right? So we're talking about one punch. Not acceptable. I'm not saying it's acceptable, but it was pursued and the officer actually did time, 18 months, I believe. Yeah. He lost his job. Now me, I hope that guy at some point sues the prison service and gets a lot of money. He wasn't a bad lad, and one punch, 18 months and made an example of. And, there was no need for it to go that far. That's either.
Silly, yeah.
It is. Funnily enough, they both ended up at Forest Bank in the segregation unit together. So Smith, who he'd punched, and the officer who punched him, were actually both in the segregation unit. But what I do know is that the staff at Forest Bank, whilst that guy was there, did look after him. He wasn't treated like scum because he was a prison officer. So, anyway, so Smith, this day, pisses me off now. This day, I'm working with Webby. Now, Webby is retired now. Webby was 60-something, which is, he's still young for a prison officer because they can work till they're 68. Webby was a guy who come onto healthcare when he was 60. Been in job a long time. Pre-riots. He was there when riots happened. But what Webby was when he come onto healthcare, he says, no, nothing about mental health, nothing about self-harm, nothing about this unit. He was willing to learn. And he enjoyed it. He learned. So this particular weekend, I'm on with Webby. So it's going to be a good weekend. I'm on with Webby. We're going to have a laugh. Not so. Smith, by this time, is 5 stone. He's a diabetic. He's probably not having a diabetic medication at this point because he's so small. He's probably not diabetic anymore. He'd lost a limb by this time as well. So he's only got one leg. So he's looking like a frail creature. So KK, my mate, says he needs to go to hospital. Now, what would normally happen, Smith will be taken to hospital by staff from elsewhere. They call staff in or use other staff. So 2 governors come onto healthcare. One who I liked, one who I didn't. Sam, Webby, yeah, you're taking Smith to hospital. Why is that then? So there's 2 other officers there. Why aren't they taking him? I've made a decision, you're taking him. So I questioned him again. Why aren't them staff taking him? Well, I'll tell you why, they refused. Because he was he was an old man who threw shit about. However, these 2 staff were going to be left on healthcare. They didn't know healthcare. We did. So, being a sensible Yorkshireman, I said to him, how about I leave Webby here? I'll go with one of them. Governor, no, I've made a decision. So, like I did from time to time, spat me dummy out, told him to go fuck himself, we'll take him. So we did. So he took Smith to hospital, all 5 stone, 1 leg, So when we gets there, we're in a very, very busy A&E. All the bays were full. There's patients in the corridor, ambulance staff everywhere. We've got Smith. So this really nice staff nurse come up. So I went up and says, look, I'm sorry, love. She says, I know who he is. She knew him because one of her friends had been scarred for life by him. So she come up, by name, said, what you doing here like? Called her all manner of profanities, names, abusive, and then he just shit on the bed. Big pile of diarrhea. Big pile of diarrhea, and then got his hand and scooped it onto the floor. So again, it's not me that has just shit on the bed. I turned to her, I says, I'm sorry, love. She says, it's all right, it's not your fault. So we were then swiftly moved into a side room. You got a reception desk with 4 clerical staff working at it. We're in a room, with all the equipment in, a bed that he's on. Webby's cuffed to him, I'm there. Doctor comes in after about 2 hours. By this time, he's dropped another one and rubbed it all over himself. So he's covered in shit, laid on bed. It stinks.
Where does he put it on himself?
Everywhere. Well, just moved his hand about his body. It's everywhere. It just stinks as shit. It's really hot. It's really hot. I don't know whether you've ever been in that environment. You can taste it and it's like, you can feel it on your skin. It is horrendous. We've been there 2 hours. So I goes out to these staff. I said, can you find out, please, whether this doctor's coming? So these staff are rather rude. Tell me to shut the door because it stinks, which it did. So I went back in. Webby says, what did they say? So I told him. So I opened both doors. So we're now in this room with both doors open. Anyway, within minutes, this doctor's here. So the doctor's coming to me. He says, we're going to need to take bloods. He's refusing. He's calling doctor old names under the sun. He's spitting. I don't know how to say this expression. When you grab up, you bring spit and God's phlegm.
Hawking phlegm.
Hawking phlegm. He is hawking phlegm up and trying to spit it at the doctor. He's still covered in shit. He's got shit on his hands, under his fingernails. He stinks. So the doctor says, can I have a word outside? He says, right, I can't discharge him without taking bloods because if he dies, we're in trouble. Is there any way we can take bloods from him? Says to Webby, repeated it, yeah. So Webby's left now, so I can say this. However, it weren't a bad thing. It might look bad to the public if they saw it in a documentary. Webby puts a sheet over his head so he can't hawk phlegm, yeah. I pinned him to the bed, which didn't take a lot of doing. He's 5 stone with 1 leg. Doctor come in, got his vein, took bloods, away he went. Came back, he says, yeah, he can discharge him. At that time, staff had just arrived. That was 4 hours, me and Webby, in a little room, stinking of shit. It just wound me up. And what was worse, when I got back to the prison, I found out that the healthcare had been locked down all day, which means nobody would be out because the staff who were on there refused to open them up because they didn't know them. So, that is a bit of the sort of, the actual situation. We did have a laugh about it, me and Webby.
Yeah.
He says, you need to put this in the book, joking, because it weren't even it was a little tiny idea then.
Yeah.
But that was made worse by the fact that staff had refused. The governor forced us to go. And then when it gets back, the actual unit where I worked had been locked down all day.
Yeah.
So, not good.
What a story. Some of my most watched videos are prison survival advice stuff. And I see a lot of ex-prisoners putting this stuff online. I've not seen anything from a guard. So say someone came to you.
Prison officers.
Officer. Say someone came to you and said, like, look, say it was like a female friend says, look, my son, he's only like 20. He's going to be going to prison for a couple of years in Manchester, for example. Would you just sit down, have a talk with him and give him some advice on how to best survive and get through it without getting any trouble? What would you tell that young person?
If he smoked, I'd tell him to stop smoking.
Okay.
Don't take any drugs. Don't take anything off anybody. And that would be a good starting point.
What would that do? Prevent him from getting in debt?
Oh, it's so easy now, so easy. Everything's double bubble, or used to be, in English prisons. What that means for our American audience and British viewers, if you lend me half an ounce of tobacco this week, next week, double bubble, I owe you an ounce. So it's very easy to get in debt, especially if you haven't got money. If you can't pay, then I might be on your case to get a family member to bring something in for me. If we go back to 2013, 14, thereabouts, you can look online at all these prison reports. The then outgoing prison inspector of Her Majesty's Prisons, did his final report on Strangeways. He said himself, tough guy this, I've seen the guy in our prison a few times. It's a tough audience, do you know what I mean? He would come round with his workers, shall we say. They could go anywhere in the prison, look at anything, talk to anyone, go into segregation, talk to any staff, talk to any prisoners, and they did a report. And people used to be fearful of him. But his report on Strangeways for safety, dynamic security, staff-prisoner relationships, everything taken into account, audits, the whole 9 yards, said it was possibly the best inspection he'd ever done. And at that time, you know, I would not have been fearful of anyone going in Strangeways because it had a good regime, it had good staff, and it was well run. Now, different place, completely transformed. So if somebody said to me now, again, I'd just, you know, keep your head down. Don't get involved in anything. Don't take anything off anybody. That's about best advice you could give.
Yeah, so in America, it seemed like debts were the biggest cause of violence, and in particular, drug debts. Would you say that's true for the UK? Yeah,
probably drugs, tobacco, phones, all these sort of things. I will mention one little thing which I could never get my head round. If, for instance, Shaun, I was a prisoner at Strangeways and you came in my cell, you were my cellmate, and the very next day I got out and I had a debt I owed someone, you would inherit that debt.
Cellmates inherit debt?
If I left the prison, someone would be visiting you. Are you all right, Shaun? Yeah. He owed me 50 quid. You know, yeah, they would. I've seen it happen. I've seen people get absolutely battered. So somebody would go in a cell with someone they didn't know, they'd get out, and that person would get battered because they'd inherited their debt. Wow. So now, with your spice, you know, your tobacco and everything else that's going on, very, very dangerous place. If you start borrowing, you're in a world of shit.
Do you think they can ever stop drugs from getting into prison?
No, definitely not. Anatomically, all human beings have... I don't have to be as God and nows with the media, but basically they'll stick stuff up their arses. You know, yourself, drones when I left in 2015 were just coming on the scene. Yeah, but you know, people used to put soap envelopes in LSD and all these fancy ways. Now they just stick it up their arse. There is people who live on the street who are going to prison with an arse full of tobacco or drugs, or people who are in debt, like the lad I know. Or people will go in themselves and take drugs and tobacco in and make thousands.
Did you watch Prison on Channel 4?
No, I didn't.
It showed the drug gangs were running the place, and some of the dealers were boasting, we're making more money in here selling drugs to the prisoners than we were before we got arrested.
Of course they will.
And then they had this scam whereby, like, so there was a shot caller, and then he had his underlings, and then they had the low-level people. So, like, the underlings of the shot caller had drugs in their cells. Guards come, raided the cells.
Is this in America?
This is Channel 4.
Prison officers, then. Go on, sorry.
This is Birmingham, I think it was.
Yeah, Birmingham. Yeah.
So basically, when they raided these cells, they found the drugs. And you think, all right, so these guys are working for the shot caller now. They're through. They're going to get extra charges. They're going to get extra prison time, blah, blah, blah. They're going to get sent to lockdown. All they did was have lowest level prisoners go to the officer's office and say, those drugs were mine.
Yeah.
And then they were laughing. They were like, they were just out dealing again the next day.
Right, here's the thing. If you find a weapon or a phone or drugs in a cell,
yeah,
and there's two people in that cell,
yeah,
you can't nick both people. At one time, a governor would say, is it yours? No. Is it yours? No. Right. Place you both on report, and they would both get some sort of punishment. Again, no longer the case now. There's a phone. Is it yours? Is it yours? That's it. They get away with it. It's not a good place to be. What I will say is private sector, when I was in it, lots said about private sector. I got ridiculed when I went to Strangeways about being at Forest Bank. Private sector, very few staff. I was on a wing. There'd be 2 staff on a wing with 86 prisoners. A lot of new staff, big turnover of staff, low wages. Now, no different. Private public sector, they've dragged it down. A prison officer's gone from 29 grand to 22 grand now.
Yeah.
You look at 4 grand of that, worst shifts you will ever work in your life. So that 22 grand also, that covers your working Christmas Day, never seen a bank holiday, never seen your family, anti-social hours, everything. They've dragged in this country public sector down to private sector.
What do you think about the introduction of the American justice and incarceration model here, the privatization, and profit, there being like this profit motive to lock people up? Because in America, 1 in 100 adults in prison right now. They started to mass incarcerate people for weed possession because they were the easiest people to arrest.
Well, I did read something about American prisons whereby, 50% people in there are sort of for selling weed and possession of a small amount of weed. And if they let them all go, there'd be no need for DEA and all these things.
Yeah.
And it is very political. I think it is very political in this country. It was never about politics, I don't think. It's about budgets and wages.
Yeah.
And making profit, but nobody should be making a profit out of locking people up. When I first went to Forest Bank, they used to get paid for every bed. So if it held 1,100 and they had 900, they get paid for 1,100. That is a fact. That changed. That has changed over time.
Yeah.
Some things in the private sector were really good. They could learn. The workshops at Forest Bank, that's where people go to work. Kitchen's fantastic. Bear in mind it was a new prison. So when it was built, it was purposeful. The workshops, they had welding workshops where you could learn to weld. Auto electrician, where you could learn to wind alternators and, sort cars out, this sort of thing. They had double glazing units being made. They had furniture being made. And prisoners would get a decent financial reward. Not massive, people would think. And some people would say, well, why are you paying people in prison anyway to go to work? Now, it's sort of backfired with public sector. If you look at Strangeways, the 2 best workshops there, because let's look at prisons, right? People talk about rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is what I had in 2012 on my shoulder with a physio. There's no rehabilitation in prison at all. We're not changing anyone. We're making better prisoners, making them more violent and everything else. So, like I said, let's go to Strangeways, the 2 best workshops. There was a plastering workshop and a bricky workshop. And when they come out of there, they could lay bricks and they could plaster and they could earn 400 or 500 quid a week. Those 2 shops went by the way for office space and interviewing space. Strangeways had a sewing shop. Yeah? Where they used to make prison tracksuits. Now, some people who had no money would gladly go to work and make prison tracksuits. Normal prisoners, You know, you get a bit of money sent in for your commissary or your canteen. You're not going to get out of bed for £2.50 a week and go and make tracksuits. You know, there's no incentive for anything. There's no purposeful activity at all.
So what's the hourly rate in UK prisons for jobs? Where I was at, it was 10 cents to 50 cents an hour, depending upon the job.
There was no specific hourly rate. The best paid job was the kitchens. Yeah. The prisoners got to eat in the kitchens. The kitchens were immaculate. 5-star hygiene rating. Well run. Decent quality food, as much as possible made from scratch. They were possibly, again, I might be wrong, maybe 15, 20 quid. The normal workshops was approximately, so if they're in sewing or plastering or bricky shop, maybe £5.50 a week. That would be for 9 sessions. Morning and afternoon, Monday to Thursday, and a Friday morning. Because prisons have targets to meet, at Strangeways, you know, last couple of years I were there, they were actually sending people part-time to work. So you'd have somebody go in the morning and somebody else in the afternoon. So you would go to work 4 days for £2. You're not going to get out of bed, are you?
No.
And the other thing is, there was a maximum on education and workshops of 400 people. You got 1,200 prisoners. You know, it's not happening.
Sam, why did you become a prison officer?
Why did I become a prison officer? Kevin Sabrolski, one of my friends' cousin, said to me way back, well, he said it a few times over a few years, but about 1998, he started talking to me. He'd been in quite a long time. He loved it. He says, you'll love it. You know, you can talk to people, chat to people. You like your rugby, bit of rough and tumble, you'll love it. So he actually got me working in the forensic units, a couple of forensic units. They were in Nottingham and Mansfield, right? So this is about 1998. So he says to me, I've got a bit of a job on side. I'm working in these forensic units, female only forensic units, which are, do you just call them mental hospitals in America? So he got me in the back door. I love that job. Basically, I worked in 2 hotels, purposely built hotels, which were changed into residential units for women. About 20, 25 in each, and they had an upstairs and a downstairs. These women ranged in age from 18 to into the 70s. They've been in the mental health system. They've been to Rampton, which is a high security hospital. Some have been to Broadmoor, which is high security hospital. They've been to Ashworth, which is high security hospital. They'd done all that, you know. It was sort of like the last call. You know, people didn't want these, extremely violent, some horrendous self-harming. He got me working there, which I really loved. And then he kept going on about prison. Job come up at Forest Bank private sector. He said to me, jump on that, get your foot in the door, and then, you know, as soon as you're in there, apply for public sector. So thanks, Kevin, for that.
Would you recommend the profession?
Right, would I recommend it? I will tell you what I told someone on a radio station, because they said to me, you know, we had a bit of toing and froing, and they said, how would you, you know, what would you say to people about this job? So I said, well, if you read my book and you still want to do the job, then maybe you're in with a chance. But the whole system is very flawed. And where they need to start, they need to look at recruitment and they need to look at training. Because no amount of training will ever prepare you for that job. Your CNR that everyone does is brilliant, but the training is pathetic, really. It's embarrassing. It might have been all right, you know, 20, 30 years ago when, you know, people were looking for a job and there were lots of experienced staff and that, but now, not so much.
We've touched on some dark stories here today, and you mentioned that one was one of the worst work days of your life. How about the highlight of this entire 11 years? What was the best?
What was the
day?
highlight? Oh my word! What was the here's the thing. I said this, two of my best friends, KK and Bradders families, remember my families, you know, I worked with those two lasses for 7 years. They were my managers. We were best friends. You know, there was lots of pleasurable days just working with lovely people on that healthcare. It was a dangerous place to work. It was extremely tough, but it was a small amount of staff and I enjoyed it. K-Wing, again, when I was on K-Wing, a lot of people who I worked with at that time, I'll say they were best prison years of their life. We had a good team. We had a laugh, lots of dark humour. It was bouncing, probably, you know, like one of your raves pretty much, K-Wing. It was like a complete zoo, but, you know, it had an atmosphere. It was going on all the time. Yeah. Lots of interaction. So... families, I've just mentioned families, right? I realise that prisoners have got families and a lot of them have preconceived perceptions about prison officers. What I need to mention is Amy, my fiancée, and Billy, my daughter, and everyone else's families who are involved with prison officers' families, because it's only now, and I mean this last couple of months that I'm looking now, Amy had some dark days. I was at work, long hours. You know, I was a grumpy, miserable bastard. I thought that I was leaving that job at the gates. And then when you speak to her, you know, not so. You know, she had loads of tears, lots of time on her own. Billy, my daughter, when I was signed off on the 6th in 2015, you know, I hadn't seen her for 6 years. I was out the door at like 6 o'clock every day, in at 10. She resented me coming into the home, and we battled and clashed, and now we have a good understanding. So, you know, there were lots of really good days, but what you forget is all the bad days. If you had one good day, a Sunday, you know, Lynn on K-Wing, bless her, cooked us a breakfast for £1. That'd be the highlight of the week. So,
I read a book. I don't know if it was Turning the Key or Turning the Screw. A journalist in New York, he wanted to go and write about Rikers Island.
Oh, yeah.
And the governor wouldn't let him in. So he applied for a job, got assigned as an officer, and, you know, he's getting all this stuff, writing all this stuff down. But within 6 months of working in this hostile, dangerous, negative environment, he started taking that energy home. And he was abusive to his wife and kids.
Stanford Prison Experiment, do you know about that?
Yeah.
Right, Stanford Prison Experiment, for the people who don't know about that. Young psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever, early 70s, behavioural experiment, asked for volunteers, split them into 2 groups. One of them, he says, you're going to be prison guards, because it was in America. The other, you're going to be prisoners. Had the prisoners arrested properly, didn't they? Strip search, spray with DDT or whatever they did. And they set up a prison environment. In a very short time, it became very hostile. The guards became cruel. And the outcome was that if you put good people in a bad place, they will become bad. What I will say is, yeah, you know, lots of negatives about prison. Strange ways, 1,200 prisoners don't want to be there, and a lot of staff don't want to be there. There was some absolute horrible bastards there. I'm talking about staff now, but far outweighed by lots of lovely, hard-working people. You know, some of them not qualified. There's some of them not qualified. I mentioned one lad in the book who looks like, you know, he looks like one of these Russian dolls. Short, fat belly, no interpersonal skills, no presence, no nothing, but a massive heart. You know, and ridiculed by staff for years, but sticks at it. So, you know, you've got to take that from it. It'd be so easy to focus on the non-negative, but there were lots of like really, really lovely, hardworking people.
On the opposite of that, then, I don't know if you would even be prepared to answer this question. Would you be allowed to say what's the worst thing you ever saw an officer do?
Right, I will tell you now, Shaun, quite definitely. The bad people, They pick their moments and pick their audience. It is very cliche that, but they do. There is people, there's a lot of officers, what I call chameleon officers. So you'll get a couple of officers, if they work with me and some of my mates on healthcare, they'd be great, you know, they'd mix in. If they went and worked somewhere else with someone who was treated prisoners like shit, and you do get people like that, they would take on that persona. There's a lot of people in there who are incredibly stressed all their prison careers because they can't be themselves. Me, I really had to fight the first couple of years to keep my personality and be who I was. Do you know what I mean? It is very difficult. The worst thing I've seen, there's probably lots of things, nothing far too extreme, although I remember one lad, one of the first things I saw, we were restraining a prisoner. He was extremely tough, and it was a very violent restraint, and we were my mate Lowy. He's a lad I worked with at Forest Bank and Strange Ways. Not a brave lad, he wouldn't like that, but as a prison officer, totally dedicated. You know, he's a fantastic guy. And we'd restrained this prisoner. We got him under restraint, so that's game over, yeah? You know, he's on the floor, and a security member of staff came in and jumped off a bunk bed into the middle of his back. My mate was up in seconds, got him bit throat, ragged him up against wall, literally picked him up. You ever fucking do that in front of me again, you know? There was one lad, again, I didn't see it. There is bad things, so, you know, I'm not going to shy away from that. Again, Lowy, I worked with him in the segregation unit at Forest Bank, so we come in one weekend. One Monday morning, there's a lad who had been in the special cell. He was an arsonist, small lad, not physically threatening in any way. He was mithersome, extremely mithersome, forever on his cell bell. Tried to get him to come out of his cell for a shower, won't come out of his cell, very withdrawn, in a corner, shaking. Anyway, we managed to get him, me and another member of staff, some coaxing into a shower. I had to fetch Lowy, covered from head to toe in bruises. He'd been battered. Nothing you can do about it. It does happen. You know, like I said, put good people in a bad place and some become bad.
The impression I'm getting from you is that you did your best under these, you know, wicked circumstances at times. Your heart was in the right place. What would you say that stopped you from becoming cruel?
I was brought up. You know, my nan used to say, speak and treat people I'd like to be spoke to and treat this in.
Yeah.
You know, very much so. That was instilled in me. That's what affected me, that I put myself through therapy because my head was fucked at one bit.
Yeah.
And the psychologist actually said to me, one of your biggest problems is you need to give yourself a break. You're far too tough on yourself. And it's also the system. The system, there's people who were my friends who I haven't fallen out with, who will never speak to me again because I've written that book. Because they believe, even though they're not bad person, I'm thinking of one specifically, I won't embarrass him and mention his name. He'll never speak to me again because even though he was a really good officer and not, you know, no darkness in him, no badness or whatever, he was a funny guy because he believes what happens in prison should stay in prison.
So they look at you as if it's a betrayal.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, a very small minority of people do, yeah.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Shaun, you know, it was important if I was going to do a book that there's things in there that the publicist says to me, particularly at the end where I levered that prisoner, you know, perhaps we don't need that in there, Sam. You know, I don't want you to get in trouble. And I jokingly said, I says it does need to be in there because that's part of the story. That's my downfall. But I also said I'd do 6 months for the publicity, which never happened.
Well, speaking of publicity, I'll mention your authenticity when I give you a 5-star Amazon review on that one. Changing a little bit up here, I had an interview, well, a brief interview I did up in Manchester last month, actually, with a guy who's got a YouTube channel called
I've come across him.
Cody.
Yeah.
I was thinking when reading your book, I bet Cody was in there, perhaps, but when you were...
I'm sure he was at Forest Bank
when you're working, yeah. Now, he's said that he was associated with the Noonan crime family.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about them?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Can you
Let's not talk about the older ones. Let's talk about the two younger ones.
Okay.
There's two twins.
Yeah.
So, obviously there was a documentary aired in Manchester about the Noonans, Dominic Noonan, Desmond Noonan and that. There's two twins. Anyway, they landed in reception, all these youngsters. They were young, possibly ranging from maybe all in their early 20s. So they were on G-wing, that's the induction wing. How the process works, from reception, you have an induction wing where prisoners would be sent, they'd have an induction, and then they move to K-wing, and then they go round rest of the jail. So we knew this bunch had landed. There were 7 or 8 of them. Can you imagine them all little manx scallies? Anyway, we got them within 24 hours. I think they came in at night. The very next morning, I was on with their Nobby Nobbler in the book. A good friend, a cracking officer. So we're on the Twos landing. It's locked down at this time, and we get these guys, and they're all over the landing. They come on, they're everywhere. It was like a bunch of school kids, but obviously they're all criminals. So we sort of rounding them up, and they're giving us all back chat and lip and stuff like that, just being ourselves. Anyway, it must have been a week later. Just explain a little bit about the IEP scene. IEP, incentive and earned privileges. I don't know what you get in America. When you come into an English prison, English Welsh prison, you come on as what they call standard regime. So you will be in a cell, you will get a TV, you'll be allowed to spend so much money, dependent whether you are a remand prisoner or a sentenced prisoner. What happens is, after a period of time, if you are a model prisoner, you behave, you're polite, whatever, you can get enhanced status, which is a level up. You can spend more money, you can get your PlayStation, a lot of controversy around that, etc. Yeah, so it's an incentive scheme. Behave, you can aim for this. If you misbehave, you can get lowered to basic regime. And when I was on K-Wing, that was done strict. Basically, your TV's gone for 28 days. If you were a sentenced prisoner, you put in corned beef, which is a prison tracksuit that is corned beef in colour, and you got very little. You got 2 hours out of cell, a shower, a phone call, and fuck all else, really. It was very strict. So we've had all these scallies come in, the 2 twins and all their cronies. Within a week, they're all in corned beef. So they're all over the landings, they're being abusive and threatening. Within a week, we sort of stood on landing, opening them one cell at a time. Please, boss, can I have a shower? This sort of thing. So even though they were lively and out there and up to no good on the out, they fell very, very quickly into the prison regime. And that is a scary thing. I want to bring up very briefly a Somalian prisoner because this is quite poignant as well. So when I'm doing my strip search, and we've already talked about in reception, and this guy sticks in my mind, we had a Somalian prisoner. So when we've taken him and there was a language barrier, he did speak English, but he wasn't understanding why we had taken him into a cubicle and what was happening with the strip search. For me, he thought he was either going to get sexually assaulted or leathered. Yeah? He was cowering and he was fucking terrified. First time in a jail, he'd been lifted. He's absolutely shitting himself. 2 weeks later, he's on the servery on K-Wing where you serve meals. Prisoners, give me some more chips. Fuck off, man, move on. Not big in stature, but in 2 weeks, he was cowering, thinking he was going to get sexually assaulted and battered in 2 weeks. That's all. And that's the scary thing about prison. When I was younger, I was terrified of going to prison. I got arrested a few times, fighting and stuff like that. Having been in prison now, it's boring. It's become more violent, don't get me wrong, but I would be bored in prison. And that's the problem. Once people get there, from being fearful, 2 weeks to fitting into the regime and it becoming the norm.
And they make their criminal connections.
It's not a deterrent.
They make their criminal connections.
So
do you think it increases crime, the system as it is then, because they learn from each other and get out and they've got bigger networks?
When I was at Forest Bank on the young offenders, they were 18 to 21, a horrendous age group, fights every day. There was 4 young lads on there. The youngest was 17. He was made an adult prisoner to put him in Forest Bank, yeah. At 17, he'd already served a sentence for armed robbery that he did at 13. So he is 17. There's another lad that's 18. There's one at 19 and one at 20. Plus a couple of other lads who were associates. They had 4 pairs of Nike trainers in the cell. You know, grand's worth of Nike trainers, pictures on the wall, Subarus. You know, they got it all. The rest of the young offenders on that wing for him for petty stuff, nicking cars, burglaries, damage. At least 2 dozen of them lads who I saw at Forest Bank, I later saw at Strangeways in for armed robberies. It's like a whole population idolised them and then went away and became armed robbers.
Is there any kind of solution or anything the government could do to get those kids off that track?
Wow. Very difficult this time. There's so many things wrong. I think you've got to get them young, Shaun. I think I've said this. You need to you know, my daughter is 12. You need to educate kids like you're doing. You know, I believe you interviewed the lad who used to be an addict. I'm sure you did. You know, get people, ex-drug addicts, perhaps ex-prison officers, police officers, people like, get them in. But the thing is, there's got to be no airy-fairy or farsing about. You need to go in and tell it as it is. Show pictures. They can look away. Tell them what it's like. You know, tell them, once you've been to jail, you're not going to be scared of jail. But for the rest of your life, you know, if I'm saying I'm taking 20 years away from you at your next 40 and you're going to spend them in a shitty little cell, you know, you need to educate kids now.
Yeah, my philosophy is more education, less incarceration. There's like a pipeline, isn't there, for the young people just to get straight into the gangster.
Right. Britain has become lawless, right? It's become lawless. Prisons are now lawless. You know, they've reduced staff to numbers that are dangerous. The dynamic security's gone. Prisoners are getting banged up more and more, so there's no staff-prisoner relationships. You know, you see youngsters on the street, there's no bobbies anymore. You know, you need to start and bring it in, but start educating people.
And give them things to do.
Yeah, once they get to prison, I can probably, okay, maybe a dozen people who've come to prison first time and never seen them again. You know, it's a revolving door. It's horrendous.
Sad. All right, then. So you mentioned that you've been reading Hard Time versus your own experience. What would you say are the biggest differences in the US versus the Manchester system you experienced in England?
I think dynamic security.
Dynamic security.
I think
rapport.
As a population of prisoners, you're pretty much allowed to manage yourselves, as it were.
Yeah.
And there isn't that much interaction from prison officers, guards.
Yeah.
You know yourself, right? You've been in some situations, you know, where you've met these mafia type people, hitmen. You've been on your own, you know, dangerous, violent individuals and stuff like that. You get used to mixing with that crowd.
Yeah.
You know, and you're not unintelligent, so you took intelligence to that. Where your mate Wildman had got some brawn and stuff, then, you know, you need one or the other, or ideally both, I would think, to survive in American prison. But again, watching what you say and watching what you do.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It is scary, but, you know, did you, how long did it take you before it became the norm? Or, I'm not saying you felt comfortable, but, you know, that initial gut feeling of being absolutely terrified, sort of, you know, you sat
First
with your Aryan Brotherhood playing,
yeah.
You know, it becomes normal.
It's like, it's almost like your adrenaline's going non-stop, and in the beginning you can't sleep, and then you like internalize your fear so you don't show it, but the pressure's so intense, I think it pushes you into mental illness. I felt mentally ill by the time I got out.
Let's switch that over here. I think prison officers now, a lot of prison officer people I work with, they can they can slag me off or say that's not true or whatever. I think now a lot of prison officers internalise it, and there's a lot of prison officers now who are extremely stressed, probably drinking massive amounts and don't see any way out. People talk about pension, Shaun. I used to get fed up with the conversation about pension. Me pension. They'd tell you how much it was going to be. They're like reassuring themselves. It's not worth it, end of the day, when you look at it. I mean, I weren't far off from either having a stroke or a heart attack or going completely cuckoo, you know, because the pressure is on that population. The prisoners, as it were, have got the upper hand, whereas they're sort of self-managing in America. The guards are stood back. I watched the programme on the Norwegian prison where they treat people civilly, and they get conjugal visits, and they see the family regularly, all that contact, and there's no violence and things like that. That'd be the way forward. But, you know, certainly this country is not, you know, how can you reduce budgets on anything to do with law and order when the population's getting bigger? You can't do it.
So how have you dealt with your own trauma, PTSD, from your experiences then?
Right, PTSD, I'm glad you brought that up. PTSD for me, Shaun, PTSD didn't finish me. You know, any prison officer, any frontline responder who goes see a psychologist or a doctor or whatever, maybe will get diagnosed. You know, if you're having nightmares or whatever, it never stopped me going to work, you know, deaths in custody, whatever. What it did in the end, it added to my woes because I couldn't shut my mind down because I was revisiting incidents, not all of them unpleasant. So, but there's no support. There's no support in prison. Got no support at all. My friend's going through it now. My friend is in a bad way, you know, and he's got to the point now where he's going to have a mental breakdown. And the prison service, now he's at that point, and now we're offering him help. And he's like said, where the fuck were you 10 years ago when I'm finding dead bodies and shit like that? You know, I was assaulted on K-Wing within my first 12 months by a lad who actually assaulted me at Forest Bite. He got me twice. However, they have a care team at Manchester. So some 2 years after this incident, I got an email. We're sorry to hear about your recent trauma. How are you? So I replied, I'm fine, thank you. What recent trauma? We believe you were assaulted. 2 years after I was assaulted, I got a fucking email from the care team. You know, there's nothing. There's no support at all. None. So I am fearful. There's people in there now who are really like, as I've said, they might never speak to me. If they saw me, they might ignore me. Others wouldn't. But you can tell they're stressed, you know, and they're sticking it out. I've only got another 10 years. You imagine 10 years of constant stress.
Was it the stress that caused you to finish?
I'll tell you what finished me. It's very easy to look back. I worked on healthcare for 7 years. A lot going on, small amount of officers. We had no prison managers, no senior officer. We were nurse manager led. So I worked with a lovely team of nurses and officers. So we got our own work ethics. We get on with stuff. You do that, I'll do that, you do that. That changed in 2015. We got prison managers. We got a new set of officers on who, to be honest, I had to be interviewed for my job to go and work on healthcare. Whilst working on there, I was re-interviewed when they re-employed. But in 2015, people were just told. So there was a lot of staff. You know, I'm going to be honest. I didn't. They were lazy. You know, they got no sort of work ethics and that. But it changed, and also the relationship I had with the nurses broke down. It became us and them. The nurses had their own working group. So I asked to move off. Yeah. So I went to work on A wing, which then the reception wing. And I was bored, Shaun, for 3 weeks. I was only 3 weeks till I got injured. I was bored, you know, it dragged, and I was just in conflict constantly because the prison population from March 2015 became unruly because there weren't enough staff to get them out. So they'd spend a weekend locked up. On Monday morning, they'd be pissed and angry. So we started getting more and more incidents, more serious incidents, more assaults. And, you know, I am a patient person. I've stood for 8 hours talking to someone who's eating their own shit before they went to hospital and that. I got all the patience in the world. But also, like I've told you, there's some lovely people and not a lot of them have presence. So if one of my mates was stood and 3 lads were having a go in the face and they were backing off because the visits were late, I would go and confront them. And quite a lot of time he didn't get support. So I became more and more confrontational. The breaking point was seeing, 2 members of staff getting laid out for no reason, other than a prisoner didn't get the meal he wanted. And then I got injured. And it was only then when I went to doctor, that I was physically and mentally unwell. So it finished me quite quick. I went from patient, calm, able to deal with that to just on edge all the time. Where a lot of people have just carried on working just the way they've always worked.
What would you say to young people out there watching this who think it's cool to get into crime? If they get arrested, they're just going to be on PlayStations all day long. You got any advice to them?
I don't think youngsters listen to advice. I think they need educating. They need something now, and I don't know how they're going to do it, whereby they're made to understand. And I know a lot of kids from sort of deprived background, poor backgrounds, might well be on streets, vandalising and stuff like that. So arresting them and finding the parents isn't going to work. If you've got no money, like now, the homeless situation, finding homeless people, what the fuck's that about? It's not going to improve anything. It's down to education. And I've seen the American programs where they take juvies and they stick them in with hardened criminals and they shit themselves.
Scared straight.
Scared straight, something like that. Take them somewhere and show them a cell in strange ways.
Yeah.
Show them what it's like. Show them what they can expect.
Just having your freedom taken away and everything else.
Your family.
Yeah, your family. The suffering on your family. It adds up. So, I'm going to highly recommend people out there. Is this available worldwide on Amazon ebook, paperback, audiobook?
I hope so, yeah. Yeah. I think it's, they put it out there where they can.
Are there any other ways people can support you? Have you got any links we can put below this video?
I've got nothing yet.
You don't have a Twitter, Facebook, anything like that, webpage?
No.
Bloody hell. So if you're out there, the only thing you can do right now is support Sam, checking out his book. It's well worth a read just to get the other perspective. I know a lot of people are into the criminal side and the prison side from the prisoner's perspective, but you should also read the officer's side as well. All right, give me a hug, big man.
Cheers. No, thanks for inviting me, mate. Very enjoyable.